It is December 29th, 2020. I was watching YouTube on my computer when at 12:19 am, everything started shaking. My mother and my sister screamed. Fortunately, we lived in a newer building on the first floor, so nothing was destroyed. The building had 3 floors and 9 flats. The second one this year, but a much stronger one. First happened in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, in March. The second one happened in a smaller town 3 kilometers away from Zagreb. It is the 7th of January 2021 now, and I am hiding from the thing outside alongside my mother and sister. We thought 2020 couldn't get worse than it already did, but we were wrong. I took interest in the earthquakes after I found out that they happen every 140 years. I found out that a lot of deaths aren't caused by earthquakes, but by some diseases or other stuff. I didn't believe it. I don't know why, but I had a feeling it wasn't for those reasons. It all started when the earthquake happened. At first, nothing was out of the ordinary, except, of course, the earthquake. Some buildings were destroyed and a lot of people were left without their homes. The next morning, the ground shook again. It was much weaker than the first one, but still strong enough to destroy houses, and it did. However, that night things started happening. During the night of 31st of December, 7 people disappeared. Disappearances were reported during the night, and the search was started immediately. 2 of the bodies were found in a bush in one of the parks in Zagreb. 3 in that small town and 4 in Zagreb. All of the bodies were missing their heads and the rest was mostly eaten. It didn't look like heads were cut off, but as they were torn off. I have a friend who is a few years older than me. He is a policeman, so he knew everything about the case. He told me everything about it. Kind of irresponsible of him, but that's Balkans. On the night of the New Year, another 13 people disappeared in Zagreb. The bodies weren't reported immediately. Most of them were reported in the morning of 1st of January, while some were reported later in the day. All of them missing their heads and had smaller injuries to the first 6. 26 were reported on the 2nd of January. Again, all of them were missing their heads with a lot of flesh missing from the rest of their bodies. Even though there were no more earthquakes, things were starting to get much worse. Not only that, but in the early mornings of January the 3rd, I saw what was causing all the deaths. I woke up at 3 am and went to smoke outside. We didn't have a balcony, and if I smoked through a window, all of the smoke would get in through the window. I went outside and leaned on the wall next to the entrance. I saw 2 girls on the other side of the street. I recognized them immediately. They were my neighbors and went to school with me. One of them saw me and waved at me. I returned the wave and she smiled. They were talking about something and laughing. They were probably at a party or something. People don't care about COVID-19 here. Pubs, cafes and clubs are closed, but people still found ways to gather in large numbers. Back to the story. I was looking at them as they were walking away. There was a smaller street connected to the main one further away in front of them. Before they got to the smaller street, a shadow started to appear on the wall. I immediately straightened up and tried to take a better look at the shadow. It was a weird shape that I don't know how to explain. The 2 girls passed the street. I was looking at the shadow as it was getting closer to the corner. When the shadow started to disappear, a creature started to appear. It scared the absolute shit out of me. It was large, about 6 feet tall at its shoulders. Its torso was slightly bent. Its hind legs were much shorter than its front legs. On the top of the toes, in its first legs, were huge claws. It was insanely skinny, and you could see its ribs and spine. The part beneath its ribs was much more narrower, to the point that I didn't know if organs could fit in. It had a long tail that for some reason wasn't as skinny compared to the rest of the body. It was light grey and looked like its skin was covered with some liquid. I still couldn't see its head. You can imagine how the shadow looked now. I started hearing whispering. It followed the girls, quickly gaining on them. Suddenly, it stopped with one of its front legs in the air. It put it down and slowly turned towards me. As it was turning, I saw its head. It was a moose skull, but without its horns. Where there should have been no teeth, I could see large sharp teeth similar to canines of wolves. There was a blood pouring like tears from the holes where its eyes should have been. Inside those holes was just darkness. It just stood there looking at me. Whispers were getting louder and louder, and my head started to hurt. Everything started to shake and was becoming insanely dizzy. I fell unconscious. When I opened my eyes, it was still night. I stood up and I was the only one on the street. I quickly got to my flat and drank some snaps. I couldn't believe what I saw last night. I looked at the clock and saw that it was 5 a.m. I was unconscious for 2 hours. What was that thing? Was it responsible for all those killings? Did it kill those 2 girls? Why didn't it kill me? Those were some of the questions I kept asking myself. I went to my room and tried to get some sleep. I thought it would calm me down a bit, and I was tired. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep. The image of that thing looking at me just couldn't leave my mind. Hearing the door of our flat opening snapped me out of this. It was my mum returning from the night shift. She started working night shifts about 2 months ago. I immediately got out of bed and went to the living room. Hey, didn't expect to see you awake this early. It was about 7 a.m. I stopped for a second. I contemplated whether I should tell her anything. Is something wrong? She asked me. No, I just stopped thinking, I spat out. She chuckled. We talked a bit about her work. Later, I texted one of the girls that I saw on the street, but she never answered. 74 people were reported missing. 4th of January. I could barely sleep. Only for about an hour. My sister told me one of her best friends went missing. She was crying for the entire day. 335 people have been reported missing over the day. It was 2 a.m. on the 5th of January when I saw the creature again. Anton, my sister, called for me. There is someone outside. They are hiding behind a tree, but I can see part of their shape. I don't believe that's a human. I quickly got to her room. What? I looked outside and there it was, hiding behind a tree. Its shape somehow looked like a man's, but it wasn't. I immediately started to hear whispering. Do you hear whispering? I asked her. What is that? She was starting to hyperventilate. The creature emerged and now the shape resembled what I saw on the 2nd of January much more. Then it took a step forward and light shined at it. My sister tried to scream, but I stopped her. Be quiet. It knew we're here, but let's not try to agitate it, okay? I spoke to her as slowly removed my hand from her mouth. She nodded back at me. Her eyes were full of tears and they ran all over her face. We looked back at the creature and it was looking at us this time. Its eyes were darkness and it was still pouring blood from them. It started opening its mouth slowly, showing its huge, terrible teeth stained with blood. It had no tongue and its throat was just as dark as its eyes. I saw something emerging from the darkness. Soon I realized it was a head that previously belonged to one of the girls I saw on 4th of January. I heard my sister crying louder. Not loud enough to wake up neighbors, but still loud. "No, no, Melissa, no," she sobbed. That was the name of her friend who disappeared. Anton, help me. Please. I don't want to die. Please help me." The face of the girl cried from the creature's mouth. After what felt like hours, but probably was a few minutes, the creature closed its mouth. It let out a deep crocodile-like bellow and went behind the tree. It disappeared. My sister looked at me terrified and hugged me. "Don't tell anyone about this," I told her. "Why?" She looked him in the eyes. "This thing killed Melissa. People need to know." I saw it before. It didn't only kill your friend, it killed many more. But we should not speak about it. We don't know how will it react to that. She was speechless. I could feel that she was furious at me for not telling her earlier, but she knew she would have done the same. "You saw Melissa in its mouth, right?" I asked her. "Yes. Why do you ask?" "I didn't." After she calmed down a bit, I went to leave her room. "Hey," she said before I could leave. She was more than just a friend. I nodded and left. I turned on my computer and tried to find anything about this creature, but I could not find. The only things that came up were Wendigo and Skinwalkers, but that thing most definitely wasn't one of those. Those two are just humans. One a shapeshifter and the other a body possessed by an evil spirit. This thing was as far away from a human as it could be. The 5th of January was also the day when people started to notice how many actually disappeared. Don't get me wrong. People knew about disappearances before this, but not all people knew about all the disappearances. The topic started to become popular and even some politicians addressed that. Some said the government is responsible. Some said that there is an organization that worked against the government. My sister and I were the only people who knew the real reason, but there's no way anyone would believe us. Even if they did, we didn't know it would help. 378 people were reported missing that day. The government decided that everyone should stay inside and go out as little as possible. No one was allowed to leave their houses, flats or workplace after 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. Police and the army were sent on lookouts. They went on patrols and were constantly on the lookout. The whole city was covered by them and there is no way something would go unnoticed yet. It did. 6th of January. I woke up at 8 a.m. It took me a long to notice, but I heard no voices outside. The previous day, we heard the army and police shouting commands or telling each other some information. Today, nothing. I went to check through my window, but there was nothing to see. There was just darkness. The black fog was so thick, I couldn't even see the ground beneath my window, which was only 10 feet below. I exited my apartment and went outside. Probably an insanely stupid thing to do, but I did it anyway. When I opened the doors, I only saw about 7 feet in front of me. I could barely see that there was some light further away. The light was coming from a street lamp. I remembered where one of the police cars was that day before. I passed the street to get to the car. The shape of the car started to appear from the fog. When I got close, I realized why I didn't hear any voices. The first cop I saw was half in, half outside the car, hanging through an open window. He didn't have a head, and he had wounds all over his body. The second cop was missing, as doors on the side. I quickly got back to the building, and upon entering, I started to hear whispering. I ran into my flat and called my mum. She didn't answer. I tried a few more times. I didn't answer. Tried to message some of my friends, and only a few of them answered back. All of them were frightened by the situation outside. There was nothing more I could do. That night I slept on the floor of my sister's room. She was too afraid to be alone. I could say the same for myself. 7th of January is where we are at now. Only one of my friends is replying to my texts. He says he is hearing whispering constantly. It's 3:27 p.m. He stopped replying too. My sister was the only person I could talk to now. 5:36 p.m. I started hearing whispering, and so did my sister. We went to check on our window, but as I mentioned previously, we couldn't see anything. I tried to follow the direction of the whispering. It was from a completely different direction. It was coming from the doors. I looked through a peephole and saw the creature. Whispering started to become louder and louder. Suddenly, we could hear a deep growl like a laugh. The creature started to open its mouth, revealing the deep darkness. A face started to appear in that darkness. It was our mum. I took a step back and my sister looked through the peephole. She gasped and started to cry. The creature used her voice. "No, please no. I have children," came out. I looked through the peephole and the face was bleeding from the mouth. It collapsed back into the darkness of its throat. We heard that deep laugh again, and then something hitting the door. They started to break bit by bit. It was getting in quickly. I knew there was nothing we could do to escape, so I ran to my computer to write a few finishing lines. I warn you of this thing. I don't know if it spread to other countries already, but I have hope. I don't know what you could do to avoid it, but I believe it is still essential to tell you this. This will be my end, and I hope people find a way to protect themselves from this. Goodbye.